Chapter 54, in which a lovely French town is bombed out of existence. Who is it? Edwin, open the damn door. Parker opened the door to the hotel room, and I barged past her and shouted at Garland, "You beat up a 90-year-old man!" Mama said knock him out, Parker sang, and I turned to her and yelled, "This isn't funny! None of this is funny!" "Shh," Parker said. And I said, "What? Am I causing a scene? You know, I'm not the one who assaulted an old French dude in a wheelchair." I turned back to Garland and repeated, "You beat up a 90-year-old man." "Son, you keep saying that like it's a bad thing." "It is a bad thing," I shouted, before slumping into a chair in the corner of the room and pulling my hair. "It's a really bad thing." I like the sirens in Europe. They make even the mildest fender bender sound like a Jason Bourne movie. However, when you know you're the reason for the sirens, they lose some of their appeal. We'd squealed out of the La Matin Vu Tonnelle parking lot on two wheels and raced back toward town at speeds our van was not designed to handle. Then I parked our borrowed vehicle outside the Museum of Fine Arts, leaving it there for good. From the museum we split up, each of us making our separate way back to Garland's room, and by the time I got there, the sirens had stopped. But I knew it wasn't going to take the police long to figure out the old man and two teenagers who'd caused a scene at the nursing home were in fact the three most wanted people in France. "It's only a bad thing if you do it," Garland said. "But when another 90-year-old does it, it's just a fight. A fight I won, by the way. Parker, dear, will you bring me a glass of water? I'm feeling a little—" Garland stumbled back on the bed, and Parker rushed over to check on him, while I ran to get a glass of water. "Is he okay?" I asked, handing Parker the water. "I'm fine," Garland barked, but he didn't look fine, and Parker stopped him from getting up. "Drink," she said, putting the glass to his lips, "and rest a minute." No one could tell Garland what to do, but he listened to Parker and leaned back against his pillow. Once I was sure he wasn't about to die, I walked over to the window and peeked behind the curtain, half expecting to see a swarm of police cars, but only seeing an old man hobbling past with a baguette. It's hard to open your eyes in France and not see an old person hobbling past with a baguette. "What are we going to do?" I whispered, when Parker joined me at the window. "I don't know," she said, "but he needs to rest. He's too old for this much running around." "I'm not too old to hear every damn word y'all are saying," Garland said from the bed, and we sheepishly turned to face him. "Hell, just last month, I won the decathlon at the Geriatric Olympics in Singapore. I can handle a 10-block walk." Parker laughed and said, "Now I know you made that shit up. I saw you every day last month." "Maybe it was 2 months ago," the old man said with a wink. Then the smile faded from his face, and he said, "Look, she's not in St. Lo. I think I always knew she wouldn't be. Who the hell could blame her?" "Why wouldn't she have come back here?" I asked. "What happened?" "Now might not be the—" Parker started to say, but Garland waved her off. "It's fine, dear," he said, and turned to me. "The devil came here, son, and he brought hell with him. And when it was over, there was nothing standing, and no one left to say what had even happened." The old man sat up a little more in bed and took another sip of water. "Just after noon on D-Day, an American bomber hit the main transformer in town, and we lost power. We couldn't see the plane or the bombs from our window, but we felt the blast and we saw the smoke. Later, we heard a man in the street shouting that he'd watched it happen. Said the Americans hit the transformer with 2 precision bombs. A lot of folks in town, and Maddie was one of them, believed the American bombers were impossibly accurate. Like we could drop a bomb in a crowd and only kill the Germans. 4 or 5 hours later, a dozen bombers came back and destroyed the train station. This time we watched from our window. Or tried to watch. You know, sound can kill you if it's loud enough, and the concussion of those blasts knocked us both on the floor, and neither of us dared to look out the window again until it was over. After that, I begged Maddie to go to the country, like the leaflets told us to do. But she wanted to be there when the Americans marched into town and raised the French flag, so we stayed. I pulled back the curtain again and looked out toward the train station across the river, but the big government building across the street blocked our view. "You see anything?" Garland asked. I shook my head no, and he continued his story. "About 8 that evening, the bombing began for real. The first one hit so close it knocked us both off the bed. I shouted at Maddie to run, and I hobbled behind her, and we hid in a closet under the stairs. There was no hiding from the sound, though. Those bombs screamed like demons as they fell, and when one hit close, it sucked the air from your lungs before hammering you with an unholy roar. Every bomb sounded like it hit the house, and I wanted to be strong for Maddie, but I was terrified. Best I could do was hold her so she couldn't see the fear on my face. When I caught my breath, I tried to tell her we'd be okay, but she just kept saying, 'I don't want the liberation. Not like this. I don't want it.'" Garland shook his empty glass at Parker, and she got him a refill. He took another sip and set the glass down and rubbed his eyes. "I'm not sure how long the first bombing run lasted," he said. "It felt like days, but they say it only lasted a matter of minutes. When it was over, I pulled Maddie from the closet, and we stepped outside into Armageddon. Her street was a smoldering ruin, and dust-covered men and women were running and shouting, except I couldn't hear them at first. The sound only came in short waves, like invisible hands were covering and uncovering my ears. We sat on Maddie's stoop because we didn't know what else to do, and a little later, a man grabbed me by the arm and pulled me around the corner, where others were digging through rubble. I helped them dig, but I never knew who or what we were digging for. We never found them either way. And after a while, maybe 30 minutes, maybe 2 hours, I went back and found Maddie still sitting on the stoop. She had to be in shock, because when I asked her questions, she wouldn't even look at me. She'd just stare straight ahead at nothing." The old man sighed and paused for a moment, and I wanted this story to go off the rails like his stories usually did. I wanted him to talk about his 24-hour engagement to Audrey Hepburn, or recount the time he played doubles tennis with Kim Jong-il, or even reassert his claim that he invented the internet by accident, because the story he was telling was hard to listen to. But instead, Garland wiped his eyes and said, "Night fell, but the burning city still glowed, and after a long while, I asked Maddie one more time if she wanted to go to the countryside, and this time she shook her head yes. We walked a few blocks, but had to turn around because a stretch of row houses had collapsed in the street, and that's when the bombers returned. We watched a rocket scream across the sky and destroy an apartment building not 2 blocks from us, and we turned to run, but I couldn't move fast enough because of my leg, and the storm caught us out. Soon the bombs exploded so fast you couldn't tell them apart. They were just one long, ghastly roar. If there's music in hell, son, that's what it'll sound like. We moved through sparks and fire and the blinding flash of 60,000 pounds of explosives until we saw through the smoke the silhouette of one of the few buildings left standing, Notre Dame." "The church from this morning?" I asked. "The church from this morning," Garland said. "There were others packed inside, huddled in the nave, and we squeezed in with them. I held Maddie tight, but a bomb hit close, and parts of the church collapsed. Shock waves tossed people on top of each other and against walls, and at some point I realized my folks were right all along. This was the end of the world. It had to be. When the bombs stopped falling, the church was so black and quiet, I thought I'd died. But the sound of people coughing and spitting up dust brought me back to life. No one spoke, but after a while we left the church and stepped into the most terrible scene you could imagine. There were no German occupiers, no American liberators. There was no St. Lo. It was gone, wiped off the map in one night. All that remained was some of the church and a few dust-covered people wandering the streets like ghosts. At some point, I took Maddie's arm, and we followed a small crowd from town into the country, where we stopped at the farm of a man named Erpan, and there we cried and prayed and tried to wake up from our nightmare. Garland finished his water and stood up and walked over to the window where I'd been standing. He peeked behind the curtain and shook his head and said something I didn't catch. Then he sat back down and said to me, "Son, that's why Maddie would never come back here." "I'm sorry, Garland," I said, before asking, "So are we giving up?" "No. Maybe. I don't know, son." "Garland, we're going to find her," Parker said, and I agreed without conviction. "Sweetheart, that's awfully kind of you to say, but we're not going to find Maddie. I'm calling Jonas." "Who?" I asked, but they both ignored me, and Garland added, "And you need to go, now, before it's too late." "Wait, go where?" I asked, but they both ignored me again, and Parker said, "I'm not leaving yet. We want to try the church one more time." "Okay," Garland said, "but you need to be moving soon. If you're here when the police arrive—" "I know. If I didn't know better, I'd think you're trying to get rid of me," Parker said, and leaned down and kissed Garland on the forehead. "We'll be right back, and then I'll go, I promise."